Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us a couple minutes early even here. Great to have you. We're going to wait till about 2 or 3 minutes after the hour for everyone to go ahead and come on in. If you do have questions that come up during the presentation, feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A function if you're familiar with that Zoom function. And we will be sure to answer as many of the questions as we can at the end of the presentation. So thanks again for everyone for joining us. You'll probably hear me repeat this exact sentence 3 more times before we get started, but it's really good to have you, and we're really excited to do this event. All right, thanks to everyone who just signed in. We're gonna wait a couple minutes after the hour to get started. Again, if you have questions that you'd like any of the panelists to answer, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A function. If you have other logistical questions, a couple of us on staff here will be happy to answer in the chat as well. So really excited for this event, and thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a couple minutes here. And in the meantime, we can launch a poll.
Why am I?
TheraPsil coming in strong.
Sam, I'm not able to get in. I mean, I'm not able to get the video.
Oh, and well, it does sound like you're in. Are you able to see the presentation?
I can see the presentation. I can see you and Bruce and Charlotte Spencer.
Great. Oh, as in you can't get your video to work?
I can't. Can you see me?
No. This was the same issue we had the other day. That's okay,
Yeah,
though. It's
I'm
primarily...
on a total, yes, I'm on it. I'd like to. I'm on a totally different computer.
That's okay. Worst case scenario, people are going to be seeing the slideshow anyways. So as much as it would be great to have your face be here, we can still make it work. As long as you can see the slideshow, that's what
I put makeup on.
We'll see what we can do to make it up to you. All right, thanks everyone who just joined. We're gonna wait about another minute or two for total mass. Really excited to have you here in coalition with our friends in Canada up at TheraPsil. And we'll get started in just a minute here. Thanks for joining us. All righty. We're going to go ahead and kick this webinar off. Thanks again to everyone for joining us. My name is Sam Chapman. I am the campaign manager for the Yes on Psilocybin therapy measure here in Oregon. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm essentially going to be the MC. So I'm just going to go ahead and move to end this poll here, and we'll share the results so everyone can see. Heavy presence from our friends in Canada tonight. So glad to have everyone here. Super excited to talk about what are some very similar but also different aspects in terms of psilocybin therapy for folks who are struggling with the end of life and terminal illnesses and things of that nature. So we've got a lot of resident experts on the panel here tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off. If Dr. Bruce, would you like to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yes, hi everyone. Glad to be here tonight. I'm Dr. Bruce Tobin. I'm the founder of TheraPsil, which is a Canadian patients' rights organization. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I've been interested in psychedelic medicine for about the last 15 years.
All righty. And how about over to Spencer?
Thank you very much. My name is Spencer Hawkswell. I am the executive director at TheraPsil. While I'm new to working in psychedelics on a more professional level, it's definitely been something that's interested me for about the last 10 years. So very excited what we're doing here at TheraPsil. Back to you, Sam.
Thanks, Spencer. And over to Thomas.
Hi there, I'm Thomas Hartle. I am a stage 4 cancer patient here up in Canada. I am very new to the idea of using psychedelics, but I have been learning very quickly, and I've been getting a lot of help from the guys at TheraPsil.
Fantastic. And how about over to Ann Jackson? Would you like to introduce yourself very quickly?
Yes, I'm Ann Jackson. I'm the former executive director of the Oregon Hospice Association, now the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association. I retired in 2008 after 20 years in that job. And since then, I've been doing consulting about end-of-life issues.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ann. And last but certainly not least, over to Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Blocker. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the political outreach director for the Yes on Psilocybin Therapy campaign, formerly known as the Yes on IP34 campaign. I'm based here in Portland, Oregon, and I came to the Psilocybin Therapy Initiative from the nonprofit sector.
All righty, fantastic. Well, the order of operations here is we're going to start on the TheraPsil side of things, and without further delay, over to Dr. Tobin, please.
Okay, so the first question is, what is psilocybin? Well, psilocybin mushrooms have been used by indigenous cultures throughout the world in religious and healing ceremonies, likely for hundreds of thousands of years. The earliest concrete evidence consists of murals depicting mushrooms found etched on rocks in northern Australia that archaeologists date back to about 10,000 BCE. And psilocybin mushrooms have documented use in ancient Egypt and Greece and Rome, as well as through the Americas as far north as the Yukon in the Canadian Arctic. Psilocybin was brought to the attention of the Western world in the mid-50s by Gordon Wasson, an American amateur mycologist who experienced them in Mexico with the famous shaman Maria Sabina. And serious scientific research began on psilocybin in Europe and America in the 60s, when early findings pointed to promising treatments for pain, alcohol addiction, and emotional trauma. It's interesting that Canada was an international leader in psychedelic research during this time, with major treatment facilities in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, and at the Hollywood Hospital near Vancouver. Apparently, the American film actor Cary Grant had over 200 LSD trips at the Hollywood Hospital in the early 70s. But research came to a complete halt in the early 70s until about 2007, when a psychedelic renaissance began with Charles Grob at UCLA publishing a pilot study on the use of psilocybin with advanced cancer patients having existential anxiety. And since then, Grob's team at UCLA has been joined by teams at Johns Hopkins, New York University, and Imperial College in London to show that psilocybin will likely be a game changer in the clinical treatment of anxiety and depression. Psilocybin has been shown by magnetic resonance imaging to create a state of hyperconnectivity between brain networks to foster an increase in neurogenesis, that is, the creation of new brain cells, and to drastically alter thought pathways. Research recently has focused most extensively on developing treatment for the emotional distress experienced by cancer patients facing their death. And on to slide 4. And the question here is, what is end-of-life distress? Well, end-of-life distress is that nasty mixture of anxiety, depression, hopelessness, and demoralization that often follows receiving the diagnosis of a terminal illness such as cancer. Their impending death becomes a crushing emotional reality, robbing them of optimism and a sense of meaning and purpose and value and direction. A terminal diagnosis represents for many patients the prospect of absolute loss of a healthy sense of control, loss of a sense that I'm in the driver's seat of my life. In death, I lose all that I have, all that I love, all that I am. And this experience can create a breeding ground for feelings of helplessness. Such patients are less likely to advocate for themselves or to participate effectively in the treatments for their other medical conditions. And the next slide, the right to die slide. Yes, Canadians have now acknowledged patients' right to die when faced with serious suffering at end of life. Surely Canadians also have the right to try a medicine that may help them want to live. And the next slide, please. What is psilocybin-assisted therapy? Well, recreational users tend to focus on the cool external perceptual phenomenon associated with psilocybin. Therapists want patients to focus almost exclusively inward, that is, to inner images, inner emotion, body sensations, and memories. Therapists lead patients to lay down through most of the session with eyes closed or covered and listening to pre-programmed music, which serves to increase access to emotional material and keep things going. Patients are encouraged to relax and surrender to the experience, whatever it is, to just be with and stay with whatever presents, no matter how positive or negative it might be. That is, to dance with whatever experience shows up and to stay with it until it transforms. But psilocybin is not just about ingesting a medicine. To be really effective, the medicine session must be embedded in a psychotherapy process, which consists of several preparatory sessions prior to the medicine and several follow-up or integration sessions in which patients are assisted in interpreting the meaning of their medicine experience and weave the healing aspects of their journey into their day-to-day life so as to create lasting change. So essential to the therapeutic relationship is the development of a deep sense of trust. That is, the patient will become unusually emotionally vulnerable through the medicine session and will be unable to open up to the depths they need to in order to heal unless that trust has really been solidified. So we use the term psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy with the emphasis on the word psychotherapy. Now, the word psychedelic here refers to a profound change in self-perception to a peak or mystical type experience in which one's ordinary experience of self as a separate entity merges to become one with the world. This unitive experience is often accompanied by experiences of transcendence, revelation of truth, and sublime love and well-being, and is very highly correlated to positive clinical outcomes. Following psilocybin, patients often describe experiences involving forgiveness, redemption, renewal, or rebirth, involving not only emotional, but also spiritual dimensions. These experiences help patients grieve over the loss of their life and come to a place of peace and acceptance of their passing. They help to restore a sense of meaning in life by giving them newly enlarged cognitive perspective. And these experiences help patients to clearly acknowledge the emotional truth of their intimate and familial relationships so that they can complete unfinished business and die in the context of love and healed family relationships. Regarding end-of-life anxiety and depression, the Hopkins team reported that psilocybin produced large and significant decreases in measures of depression, anxiety, or mood disturbance, and increases in measures of quality of life, life meaning, death acceptance, and optimism. And what's really significant is that these effects were sustained at 6-month follow-up. And the New York group reported that psilocybin has a well-established physiological and psychological safety profile in human laboratory and clinical trial research. There were no serious adverse effects, either medical or psychiatric, in the trial that were attributed to psilocybin. Thank you.
Alrighty. Thanks, Dr. Tobin. And over to Spencer.
Awesome. Thank you, Sam, and well done, Bruce. So who is TheraPsil? TheraPsil was formed in 2019. However, its history goes back a bit further to a Section 56 application that Bruce Tobin and his clinical team had submitted sometime in 2017. It took about 3 years to get the no from Health Canada that the application would be rejected. And this application was on the basis of the research that is done. And it was asking that they may, that is Bruce and his clinical team, recreate the clinical study that was done for a class of patients. And that was cancer patients who had end-of-life distress. So it was designed to be an application that was impossible to say no to. However, it ended up being a no. So nonetheless, in 2019, we decided to get together the legal team, the patients, and the clinicians, as well as some citizens, such as the ones here at this call, and form a nonprofit coalition and patient advocacy group called TheraPsil. And the focus would be completely on compassionate access to psilocybin therapy for end-of-life distress. And in addition to just seeking access through advocacy, we also decided to expand and create a mission, vision, and values. And so that mission expanded to professional training, public education, and research as well, as we believed that you couldn't just legalize something. I think it was also Bill Richards that had been quite clear on this, is even after you legalize something like cannabis, it takes quite a bit of time in order to get acceptance from the general public and from healthcare practitioners, thus making it incredibly important to have a focus on the training of both those professionals and the very people who may benefit from this medicine. And of course, there's evaluation of research that is to be conducted, as who knows where psychedelic research will take us once it's a bit more liberalized. So there came to be this benefit in who we are and why we cared. It's interesting being a group of healthcare practitioners. I think we're 90% healthcare practitioners, doctors, therapists, and psychiatrists, as well as some counselors. It turns out that when you ask why we care, the truth is it's everyone's duty. And in being a healthcare practitioner, you swear an oath to do no harm and to treat patients to the best of your ability. So it became very clear that if you are educated and if you knew what you knew, it was your duty to fight to change the laws and to educate others and to help your patients. So that's what we did. And in 2019, we started putting together patient-specific applications, as when we got our rejection from Health Canada, their only reason for rejection was a lack of evidence of need, so a lack of need out there. So we took that as, I guess they wanted us to put individual patients forward, and we certainly had quite a few that were reaching out to us. So that's what we've done. And we're now at a point where we have 4 applications, so we can, sorry, Sam, take that to the next slide here. Thank you. So as an update where we are, we have supported 4 patient-specific Section 56s, and those have gone to Health Canada. Those individual applications are each supported by a psychiatrist and a therapist. The psychiatrist who has more or less written that patient a prescription, so that it's now up to the health minister, Patty Hajdu, to accept that and to grant legal access to possess, consume, and cultivate psilocybin. And Health Canada should also know that the therapist is going to be using the protocols put forward by the NYU and Johns Hopkins group. In addition to those 4 patient applications, and in regards to professional training, TheraPsil has also supported 9 healthcare practitioner applications that have gone to Health Canada. And the idea is that in order to get high quality psychotherapeutic sessions done for patients, those very trainers, they need to have experience with psychotherapy. And I owe it to Bruce, he puts it the best way. You would never suggest that someone goes to a sex therapist who's never had sex before. So it really is experiential, and part of creating high quality therapists is getting them high quality training. So today is day 98 that these 4 patients have been waiting for access. And we continue to wait. There is some news from Health Canada that on August 4th, there will be an update. So we do look forward to that update and can only hope for the best. Just to expand quickly as well on the pillars, compassionate access is the advocacy work we do. However, as mentioned, we do have professional training, and we seek to create a training program that really looks more like professional education, if you will. And that is to get more healthcare practitioners aware of the benefits of psilocybin, as if tomorrow it was something to be legalized, there is still a problem. And the best anecdote for that problem is what has happened with cannabis in Canada. It has now been, I think, about 20 years since it has been legalized. However, there is still a great number of patients that find it hard to get access. Largely because there is a lack of doctors who feel comfortable prescribing it. So that is the issue of education and training. And as for research, this is something we hope to expand upon very soon. Next slide, please. Okay, that is over to Thomas.
Hi there. So I am Thomas Hartle again. Please excuse me, I am not a professional speaker, so I will ask that everybody humors me a little bit, and I will do my best to not mess this up too badly. I am an IT guy, so I don't really consider myself to be a religious person. To say that getting a stage 4 cancer diagnosis is a life-changing experience is really an understatement. It's so much of an understatement, it's laughable. If anything about cancer can be laughable. I realize, everybody is going to die eventually. Having a personal crisis like this is definitely not unique to me. I have some people who comment that, everybody dies eventually. What is the big deal when you have cancer. And of course, the problem is that as soon as you start the clock ticking, your life has a whole different perspective. Everything that you have ever thought about doing is now a question. Do you have a chance of living long enough to do the thing that you want to do? And when you start to question everything, of course, you're going to get anxiety from that. For me, this whole idea of taking psilocybin isn't something that just comes natural to me. I spent most of my life being a very boring lifestyle. I didn't trust any drugs at all until I was 48 when I got my cancer diagnosis. At that time, I was introduced to medical cannabis, another natural product, and I have found that my life is probably very much due to my use of medical cannabis. For me, I take it for treating my nausea and my lack of appetite from the chemotherapy. And frankly, the stuff is very, very effective for treating that. When I found out that I had cancer, I naturally did what I do best, and that's a lot of research. For me, the research went largely into what is going to treat my cancer. I had 12 rounds of a type of chemotherapy called FOLFOX, and FOLFOX has a side effect of causing neuropathy. That's where you lose the feeling in your fingers and toes. So doing research for what I could do to fix that, I came across a type of mushroom, lion's mane mushroom, which was being studied in Japan, which proved to be pretty effective for treating neuropathy. When you punch in mushrooms and cancer, however, you come up with the research that was done in Johns Hopkins University. So that was actually my first introduction to the idea that psilocybin for treating anxiety even existed as a thing. Again, one of the problems that we have is a lack of information out there. There is this tremendous body of information that I discovered, in doing research, and I'd never even heard of it. And nobody told me that mushrooms were anything but a bad idea when I was growing up. But when you come up with some of this research, you find out that in fact there is evidence that psilocybin is 80% effective. 80% of people who tried this out have a spiritually meaningful experience. And again, I've said I'm not a religious person, but to me, spirituality is different from that. And people describe this experience as being spiritual, so I have to go with that. Now, sorry about that. Participants talk about feelings of connectedness and an understanding that the nature of the universe is love. And when you start to talk about things like that, you really go outside the bounds of typical Western medicine. And that's where I run into a lot of roadblocks in my experience. My family doctor, who is very supportive of what I do, who happens to be one of those doctors who will write a prescription for medical cannabis because she is aware that it is beneficial, really did not have the knowledge base necessary to determine whether she even had an opinion on whether psilocybin would be beneficial for me or not. So, if you have a symptom and you can treat it with a pill, that seems to be very good with Western medicine, but not so much for things that are spiritual. And when you're thinking about dying, how could that possibly not be a spiritual experience? There's literally nothing that's more personal than coming to terms with your own mortality. Obviously, the source of my anxiety isn't really difficult to understand. if you go to your doctor, they'll talk about different medications you can take that will mask the symptoms of anxiety. If you have high blood pressure, the rapid heart rate, you can mask those things. And you can go to a therapist and you can talk to them, and eventually you may come to a resolution of these things. But unfortunately, with people like myself, the clock is ticking. And what happens if you don't want to just mask the symptoms? What happens if you want to actually look for a cure? Western medicine says, if you have a headache, well, you take an analgesic of some sort. If you have indigestion, you block the stomach acid. But if you want to look at a natural thing that can treat that, Western medicine seems to be quite a ways behind a lot of other places. The options that we have here in Canada is we have to do these Section 56 applications. So where normally with medical cannabis, you can just go and talk to your doctor about this. With a Section 56, now I have to communicate with government officials, and I have to share my medical information with people that I normally would have absolutely no interest in sharing my medical information with, which to me is really a bad way of doing things. We happen to have something that medical studies have shown is 80% effective. That's a really big number. What is also a big number of 80% is the number of people that my particular type of cancer kills in under 5 years. And I have had this since 2016. So it really doesn't give me a good feeling when I have to wait extra time for things like an application. There are people who are certainly in worse shape than I am, and they would be making the same delays as well. Most of the points of resistance that I have run into with this whole application process is a lot of misinformation that's out there. If there was a lot better knowledge on the part of the people who are making these decisions, the fact that functionally psilocybin has no toxicity. You would literally have to consume pounds of it before it could have any detrimental effect on you. It has no lasting adverse side effects. And I have to tell you that the chemotherapy that I'm on definitely has a lot of lasting adverse side effects. Worst case scenario, they talk about a bad trip. And from the research that I have done, a bad trip is really just a scary trip. And that's the whole point of having therapists there to support you. This isn't just for fun. This is therapeutic. And we want to use this in a safe, structured environment. I guess the last point that I want to make here is, at what point do we say that my right to do with my body is my own? I already have the right that if I decide that I am, beyond what I can handle with my symptoms from the cancer, I could end my life at any time. Why would I not be able to try something that would reduce my suffering and make the time that I have left something that I can share with my family instead of sharing it with my anxiety? And that is about all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Thomas. It was a very powerful story. We all really appreciate you being here and sharing that with us. It really means a lot. Alrighty. And here's some other stats that looks like I didn't get to regarding some of the poll. Maybe Spencer, do you want to, did you already mention this, or do you want to just say a few words before we flip over to the Oregon side of things about this poll? This poll is how we got connected. I figure it's worth a couple of words if you would.
Absolutely. Yes. So I think it was about a month or two ago, TheraPsil just commissioned a poll. We wanted to see what Canadians thought about access to psilocybin for medical use. And the results were absolutely astonishing. the poll showed that top of mind, unaided questions. So just going to a random Canadian and asking, what are your thoughts on psilocybin for medical use? 41% of Canadians accepted. And with another question, providing them a small bit of education, right? Again, why education is so important. We said that there had been research done at Johns Hopkins that showed that it was highly effective to treat end-of-life distress. That number skyrocketed 18 points to 59%. Now, Canada is quite a progressive country as far as drug policy goes, and I'm sure that this would have been different 20 years ago. But the point is, this is today, that we have 59% of Canadians, what you would call a landslide, right? If this were an election and someone won by 59%. An absolute majority of Canadians saying that this is something that they accept. So we use this to urge our government to make some changes to the regulations in Canada. I know we're crushed for time here, so we can go to the next slide here, Sam.
Great. Let me, I may have to re-share this really quickly to get the sound to work. Let's see if it works. Can other people hear that? No?
No.
Okay. 1 second. All it takes is a quick re-share. Hang with me. Oop. Hold on, one more time. Screen share. Share computer sound. All righty. Oh, wow. Really butchering this, you guys.
There's two things certain in life. We are born and we die. Where did we come from? Where are we going? With the psilocybin mushroom experience, you suddenly know that you're part of a giant oneness. And it gives you context and consolation about your own mortality. So I think it's critically important that at the end of your life, you have a right to these substances. Who dares say that you do not? When these have been used for thousands, probably tens of thousands, maybe millions of years, and laws have been created to ostracize people to use them only in the past 50 years? I mean, it's not only academically naive, it's immoral. And I think that everyone has a right to how they're going to leave this life.
Yeah, so a huge shout out to Paul Stamets, who's working with our team, especially on our legal side, for creating that video. I think that was also done on his birthday. So just a quick wrap up here. So what does success look like for the TheraPsil team and for Thomas here? The answer is simple: is that the Section 56 applications are approved so that patients can possess and consume this medicine and do it with their doctors and therapists. And as I said, August 4th, we have confirmation from the Office of Controlled Substances and Health Canada here that a decision will be made. So that's in less than a week here. There'll be some big news. And if that doesn't wind up being what the government does, granting it, there are some legal options and continued advocacy. And so that's why the long-term goals are creating a system similar to cannabis, but not the exact same, where it is a doctor and a patient that get to decide what medicine is right for them. So that is otherwise known as the doctor as a gatekeeper, and that doctor can prescribe psilocybin. There should be the ability to access both your own homegrown psilocybin as well as synthetic psilocybin from a licensed producer in Canada. And finally, that doctors and therapists and other healthcare professionals should have access to professional training, and not just the didactic, but experiential as well. And I think our last slide here is just how you can support us. And so we certainly would love if you'd share some of our content on social media. Please message your MPs, message Patty Hyde, you let them know what you think, use your voice. And if you'd like to donate, you can message to this email address down there, and we'd happily accept donations. And finally, our website, of course, you can check that out. All right, thank you very much, Sam. Over to IP34.
All right, thanks TheraPsil team. It's such a pleasure to be doing this with you. All righty, and I'm gonna go ahead and kick it over to Charlotte, the psilocybin therapy political director, to Actually, no, we're actually gonna, sorry, I mixed that up. We're gonna kick it over to Ann Jackson to talk a little bit about her background and a little bit of history on death with dignity here in Oregon. Ann, take it away and just tell me when you'd like me to flip a slide. And I will, let's see, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Should be able to unmute there. I think it might be right on your screen.
There it is.
Or,
It was very exciting to be involved in end-of-life care in the late 1980s and early 1990s. I didn't realize it at the time because I was new to hospice myself at that point in time. I started in 1988. Oregon adopted advanced directives in 1977. It was the second state in the nation to do so. And also at that time, Oregon Health Plan, Oregon's plan for universal health care for every Oregonian was getting underway. And comfort care was one of the categories that everyone would have access to. Palliative care and comfort care are pretty much synonymous, but they divided them up. Palliative care is more a word that's being used lately. The Pulse Task Force, physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, now portable orders, had its first meeting in 1990. It was the Pulse is the document that converts advanced directives into doctor's orders. And we also had physician-assisted suicide. Senator Frank Roberts had submitted 3 bills legislating, allowing that to happen in Oregon. They all died in committee, but they did turn out to be good templates for Washington and California and Oregon. Change. Move slide, please. Can I move the slides myself? Am I gone?
Sorry, no, I'll be moving the slides for you. Can you see the next
Okay.
one?
Yes. All right. The Oregon bills and the measures that were done in California and Washington were both defeated, but Oregon at Death with Dignity Act added a provision that prohibited euthanasia, and that one passed barely at 51 to 49%. And the Oregon Hospice Association at that time issued a press release saying that it no longer mattered whether physician-assisted suicide was right or wrong. It was a legal right in the state of Oregon, and that we would support all Oregonians to make that choice. The federal injunction stopped implementation of the law immediately almost. And then the task force to improve care of terminally ill Oregonians was convened. And after that, we weren't going to wait around for nothing to happen. So we planned what we would do with physician-assisted suicide, which I would never use those terms these days. Change slides. New slide. Ballot Measure 57 was a legislative initiative that would repeal the Death with Dignity Act. In 1997 of October, just before voters went to the polls, the injunction was lifted, but no one really recognized that that had happened. But the repeal attempt failed by a measure of 60 to 40%. Not only Oregonians hadn't changed their mind, they wanted it even more so. The law didn't effectively become implemented, though, until April of 1998. There were other kinds of things going on. By 2006, the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of Oregon at 6 to 2%. Then in 2008, Washington passes its initiative, and Vermont, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey was the last state, and the District of Columbia followed suit. Change slide. New slide. May I have a new slide, please? Hello.
I think Sam's computer's just
Sam.
acting up a bit.
Okay. Well, I can.
Sorry, folks, my internet literally just crashed. Can you see the slides? Are we good?
I can now.
Okay,
Right.
on with the show. Sorry.
Okay, well, I'm sorry too. I wanted you to know that I opposed the Death with Dignity Act. I am now a very strong advocate. I believed at that time that medical aid in dying wasn't necessary if people had access to hospice and palliative care. And by the time Oregon did pass the measure, everyone had access not only to hospice care and palliative care, but to the Medicare and Medicaid hospice benefits. It was really cavalier of me to think that hospice could really address all needs, or that some needs, such as autonomy, are unworthy. I think autonomy is one of the more important ones. I believe today that the bar is too high. There really have been no abuses. It's time to adjust the law to some extent. We've kept it in place because we didn't want to rock the boat. But we know so much more now, and nearly all of the safeguards are constructed for people who oppose the idea. Those are to make them feel comfortable rather than for the people who are suffering. I think dementia should not be ignored anymore. And there are concerns that if someone asks for palliative sedation, it's going to be considered euthanasia, and I've seen that happen. Change sides. New slide, okay.
And
yes.
I'm sorry, we are getting short on time. Is it okay if I ask you to move to your personal portion of this?
These are the personals.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead. My apologies.
I have 4 of them, and I don't need to talk about all of them. If you could back up one slide. And we were talking about the fears that people have. Kathleen Gosling was a friend of mine. She was diagnosed with lung cancer and admitted to hospice in Salem. She had asked what dying was like one time of the hospice nurse, and they told her, well, she would just fall asleep and never wake up. From that point on, she was horrified, terrified to even close her eyes and try to go to sleep. She was so anxious. I'll skip. Well, I'll talk about John Huntington's palliative sedation. He had psychotic episodes. And one of the advantages of palliative sedation is that it's reversible. And he was my fiance. I'd gone to California to get married. And in the middle of 1996, but I could see that he was jaundiced when I arrived. And so he was admitted to hospice in July of 1996. And when we tried to pull back this secobarbital that he was getting, it didn't work, and he continued on. The next slide. And Bill Duncan was my next fiance 23 years later, and he used the Oregon Death with Dignity Act last year on December 3rd, 2019. We had been together for 10 years. He had been diagnosed with prostate cancer with bone mets in March of 2010 and thrived on the various kinds of therapies that he was given. But he was one of 188 people who used the Death with Dignity Act in 2019, and one of 1,678 who had used it between 1994 and 2020. It had been predicted that thousands of people would be using the law. Bill is important to the extent that he was a medical student at Columbia, and he was a subject, medical students never have any money, on psychedelic. And so he used psilocybin and thought it was an absolutely marvelous drug. And he'd be very pleased to know that I was working on this. He died before he got to see that. And the next slide, and dementia obviously is another thing where psilocybin could be of great value. I think it's a good sign here that this bill is going to pass, or the ballot will pass. When Ira Byack and Timothy Quill, palliative care physicians who both support psilocybin therapy very strongly, and they also, Byack opposes medical aid in dying, and Tim Quill strongly supports it. So if they can get together, so ought a lot of other people. And that's it.
Thank you, Anne. Really appreciate you providing that background and those stories. All right, over to Charlotte.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I know we're tight on time, so I'll try to do a speed run so we have some time for questions at the end. Anne did a great job of summing up the history of Oregon's Death with Dignity Act, which kind of leaves the stage for this next bit that we're going to talk about here. It's no secret that here in America, we're having a mental health crisis. The problem is especially acute here in Oregon. According to aggregate data by Mental Health America, Oregon's mental health crisis is 50th in the nation. This next slide here just talks about how that's not getting any better. At the beginning of quarantine, 1 in 5 Americans was experiencing symptoms of mental health illnesses such as anxiety and depression, and that number has gone up to 1 in 3. So we have an opportunity right now to rise to the challenge and legalize a new tool to help people. Next slide, Sam. Yeah, let's talk about the research. Rigorous studies at prestigious medical research institutions like Johns Hopkins, UCLA, and NYU are showing that psilocybin therapy works. It's uniquely effective in treating depression, end-of-life anxiety, and addiction even. It has shown so much promise that the FDA recently granted it breakthrough therapy designation. This means that psilocybin-assisted therapy has demonstrated substantial improvements above and beyond what is currently available for patients. So let's talk about what the measure does do. Our goal here in Oregon is to create a licensing and regulatory framework to serve those who seek psilocybin therapy who can safely benefit from it, whether or not they have been officially diagnosed with a specific mental illness. So what this does do is it'll establish this framework underneath the umbrella of the Oregon Health Authority. This will allow trained practitioners to administer psilocybin services at specially licensed centers only. It establishes an advisory board, which will be appointed by the governor, and this advisory board will work for the next 2 years to develop all the rules and regulations around the initial licenses before those are granted in 2023. It'll establish that training and licensure system for facilitators, service center operators, manufacturers, and the testing labs. And it will also require the establishment of a tracking system for all psilocybin products in the state. What our measure does not allow is retail sales. People always want to think of medical or recreational cannabis, but there's not going to be any psilocybin dispensaries. There's not going to be any off-site consumption or possession of psilocybin under this measure. There will be no advertising of psilocybin, right? You won't be driving down the highway and see any billboards about it. Unregulated and untracked psilocybin production, delivery, and inventory will remain illegal. There will be no centers near schools. Minors under 21 will not be permitted to have access, and there will be no permission for local variations of the program. So a lot of people want to know what a psilocybin session might look like once this passes, right? It's going to be a 3-step process. The first session is going to be a standardized risk assessment where you'll be screened for contraindications that might mean that this will not be a beneficial or safe experience for you. You'll be reviewed for mental good health and goodness of fit. Then you'll have the psilocybin session at the service center with the facilitator. And then there's a third session that is to be offered afterwards, where you go back with that facilitator and you integrate what you learned during the session. So let's talk about our polling and our focus groups. So we know that we have some key questions that we need to explain, similar to what TheraPsil was saying. If we can explain the answers to these questions in plain language, we can win in November. And these questions are: what is psilocybin? What does the research say about psilocybin? What does our measure do? And sometimes more importantly, what does our measure not do? And who stands to benefit the most from having access to this important therapy? So this is the poll that I feel like really references TheraPsil's poll. They're very similar. On the left, you can see the initial vote after people read our ballot title. This is not something that we get to choose. That sits at 43% yes vote. After a plain language explanation of our ballot measure and what it does and doesn't do, that jumps to 54%, and it remains at 54% even after opposition messaging is read. So here we have a couple of endorsements. First up is Dr. Janice Knox. She's a local endocannabinoid specialist in Oregon. Next up we have Nick Gideon. He's a family physician. He's also the hospice medical director at OHSU here in Portland. And on the next slide, I believe we have our Psilocybin Therapy Advisory Board. Some of these faces may be familiar. There's Paul Stamets, Robin Carhart-Harris, Francois Borzat. We have some great heavy hitters here. Mark Hayden, the Executive Director of MAPS Canada, and Pam Christow is a clinician and researcher in Canada. And if you have any questions, you can email me. It's charlotte@yesonip34.org. That's our website there, yesonip34.org. You can sign up to volunteer or donate on our website. And this final slide here is where you can find us across all social media. So this last slide, if you want to move to it, Sam. There's our Facebook group, which you're welcome to join. And you can find us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, yesonip34.org. I hope I didn't miss anything important, and I think we can open it up for questions now.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Great job. I'm gonna start sharing this and let me open up the floor for some questions. Give me just a minute here. All righty. Let's see here. So we have a question from Jim Moore, which looks like might be a good question for Spencer. What are the ways patients can currently access psilocybin in Canada through compassionate access, online distributors, and what is developing? I think we might have answered some of that, so I'm also going to ask a secondary question in addition to that, which is, has there been engagement of the Canadian Association of Palliative Care Physicians or of the National Medical Assistance in Dying Oversight Group in relation to supporting or advocating psilocybin therapy in end-of-life care?
Awesome. Thank you very much. So to answer that first question, what are the pathways currently available? Obviously, TheraPsil is focusing on legal pathways, and to do this legally, there are about two options. And the first is you can engage yourself in a research study, which we know is quite expensive. So that could be like a phase 1, 2, or 3 clinical study. However, that is not the way for the masses to get access. And it's also not a way to get fast access. So that leads us to the second way to get access, and that is through Section 56, which is what Thomas has done, and what 3 other Canadians have done, and what hopefully other Canadians may be applying for soon. As for online distributors, I can't suggest that you go to any of these, simply because it is unfortunately illegal. However, in the future, it may be a possible way. As for engagement with the Canadian Association of Palliative Care Physicians and National Medical Assistance in Dying Oversight Group, there's certainly organizations we would love to work with. The problem now is it is currently still an illegal treatment. So working with them is really an aftersight, and it's one that is going to depend on how well we can educate organizations like this, as they are also equally composed of doctors and therapists and lawyers and folks that realize that this is not accessible yet. But eventually, that's absolutely our plan. And we have had some conversation with palliative care groups and oncology groups in Canada that hopefully after August 4th, we'll be able to go to with a new message as to how we can partner.
Fantastic. Thanks, Spencer. The next question I'm curious if Thomas might be able to weigh in on. Thomas, for other people that may have been given currently a terminal diagnosis, but have never heard of psilocybin, what should they know? What could you share a little bit about your experience when you had first heard about psilocybin? What your reaction?
Yeah, absolutely.
From today.
So for me, first learning about psilocybin was, again, I found that on PubMed. That's where I do a lot of my research for different upcoming cancer treatments. And that is where a lot of medical papers are published. So for me, finding out that, psychedelics might actually have some therapeutic benefit was a total surprise. I'd never heard anything about that. But when you start looking into it a little bit further and you find out how psychedelics increase the neuroplasticity and lower the fear responses, and you start to look at some of the research that's already been done, you find out that there is this tremendous body of knowledge that seems to be invisible to a lot of doctors, which is what happened when psychedelics were declared illegal back in the 60s. So there's this big batch of knowledge, and then there's this big void, and now you're starting to see a little bit of new information starting to trickle back in again. So for me, finding out that it was even a thing was very eye-opening, and I think we need to put a lot more effort into just informing the public on what is the reality of psychedelics. You hear that people are going to take a psychedelic and go jump out a window. And then you actually talk to people who have used this in a therapeutic setting, and you find out that it's nothing at all like that. The amount of misinformation is a sad thing that's out there. I'm not sure if that covered the question, but that's really kind of how I came across this stuff. And you find out that it isn't scary and terrible. It's actually, for a lot of people, a very nurturing and inclusive experience that a lot of people say is among the most profound experiences of their life. How can that possibly be a bad thing?
Thank you, Thomas. And Jack, similar question. It's from Meg. Reference who have died in your life. Do you believe it is? Am I breaking up?
You are.
Yeah.
Sorry. And am I okay now? I'm going to ask the question one more time. It's okay. For those that you referenced to have died in your life, do you believe that they would have benefited from psilocybin treatment had it been an option for them?
Yes, I do. And that was why I included those people there. So am I coming through?
Yep. No.
Good.
Easy enough.
You looked like I was out of here again. Yes, I included those.
Sorry.
people.
Yeah, my internet connection is giving me trouble. Okay. Let's see here. Dr. Tobin, a question for you. During the preparation of a psilocybin session, do facilitators teach patients how to meditate, and or do they recommend that patients start a meditation practice prior to a session? Is that something that you would envision? Oh, Dr. Tobin, you're gonna have to unmute.
There we go. Yes, I think meditation can be a great personal resource for going into a psilocybin experience. So some patients are well versed in meditation. Some have never meditated before. I like to keep things very simple. I like to teach a very slow relaxation breath, sometimes called the yogic relaxation breath. I also see an important place for holotropic breathing. That is a quick, deep, and fast breath. So between the slow breath and the faster breath, both of these are personal resources that can help a patient manage their way through the actual medicine session.
Fantastic, thank you. A question for Charlotte. When IP34 passes, will it be a part of healthcare for all here in Oregon? Will it be covered by insurance, I think is the general question there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we get a lot. The answer is that it's too soon to say, but it's one of the reasons why outreach and especially education is so important right now. If we can show the promise that psilocybin therapy shows and why insurance should cover it, we can make a much stronger case for having that become a reality.
Absolutely, thank you. Okay, we had a question come in by email, and I think this one I'm going to look at Anne and Dr. Tobin. So a little bit of background, this is from Alicia Richardson. She says, my 90-year-old grandmother is dying of liver cancer. And she's been given a matter of weeks / a month to live. Grandfather, excuse me. And he is in pain and always tired and sleeps most of the day and night. He's also in a nursing home with limited visits allowed due to COVID-19. Is this a treatment that is, one, worth getting for him in this stage? And two, there's some other questions about how often would he take it and what would the side effects be?
Is that question for me, Sam?
It can be. Yeah. You can go ahead, and then Anne, if you have thoughts on that follow up too, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Sure. Psilocybin is a very benign medicine, but it does exert a certain physical toll on the body. I think the main determinant in whether a patient with a very advanced condition takes it or not, this is going to have a lot to do with their motivation. If they're really up for it, I would go with their decision, unless there were specific medical indications that I was hearing from their physician.
And I would like to add to that I hope that this person, whose grandfather is in hospice care, they should not be experiencing pain. And psilocybin is one of those things that should be anticipated as needed earlier on in the treatment of the patient, because it takes longer to take effect, is my understanding.
Thank you. Let's see here. We have a question from 8th Gen Therapeutics. If the Honorable Patty Haju approves these 4 patients, does that mean that you will have the full approval that you need to move ahead? And also, what does that mean for future patients? Do they need to apply individually after, or will it create access for all of these patients?
So I can answer that. At the moment, if Patty answers these with a yes, so it will certainly give Thomas and the other patients the ability to possess and consume psilocybin. However, there's still a problem within Canada, and that is with our Food and Drug Regulations Act, because it would not at that point be possible for someone like like Thomas or Laurie Brooks, who's also been quite public, to get access to synthetic psilocybins, is you should be able to have the option whether or not you want to grow your own or whether you'd like to buy it from a licensed producer. So this would certainly help people and is a first step in getting psilocybin access to Canadians. However, it does have to move further. And what we might suggest is removing psilocybin from Schedule J and as a Schedule 3 narcotic, because it should be more accessible to other Canadians. So as amazing as it will be when access is granted to Thomas, there will still be some more work to be done. And I think it'll prove as an example that it is safe and can be accessed by patients in a safe way. And it is our hope to further do more of the work that you guys have done with your ballot initiative and in writing regulations to make a suggestion and work with the Government of Canada in order to put forward suggested regulations, as it is completely within their wheelhouse, right? They can do this. They could do it tomorrow. They could put forward those regulations. We just really need some political leadership here.
Fantastic. Thanks, Spencer. And with that, there's a couple of questions we definitely didn't get to. Please feel free to email those questions directly to us. For those who had to leave early or joined late, we will be providing a link, probably both on our campaign YouTube page as well as TheraPsil's YouTube page of this entire presentation. So you can binge watch it throughout the night. If you're done with all your Netflix shows, this will be a good one to share with friends as well. And at the end of the day, it's just such an honor to be able to work with our friends up north on this issue. Again, as both of our pollings have shown, when we're able to really explain to people what psilocybin is and what the research is showing and who stands to really benefit from having access, which, as this entire presentation has shown, folks at the end of their lives that have been given terminal diagnosis stand to benefit a lot from having access to psilocybin therapy. And so I just want to thank all of our panelists again for making the time to really make this webinar a success, and to all the attendees as well. Please, once we do send this link out, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with the general public. I think one of the most important aspects of both of these campaigns is giving people a chance to be educated on psilocybin therapy that don't know what psilocybin therapy is, or maybe they have seen a negative connotation due to an experience they've had, or some of the propaganda that's been pushed forward over the last 50 years. It's really important that we educate people on this issue. And so in order for us to continue to build the political momentum in Canada and Oregon, across the US and around the world, every one of us has a role to play. And so that really comes down to a foundation of education. And so thank you again for joining us. And Spencer or Dr. Tobin or anyone else, unless you have any other final words to add.
Just thank you, Anne. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Sam, Bruce, and Thomas. Yeah, this is amazing.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Have a good night.
Everyone.
Thanks.